Welcome back to the Beyond the Wire podcast. I am your host, Tim Keller. Along with me, as he always is my awesome co-host, Mr. Matt Disher. How are you today, sir?
It's another sunny day in Cincinnati, Tim. How the heck are you?
I'm doing all right. It's nice and sunny here. It's warm, but it's not hot. It's a decent summer day, actually. It's not too terribly muggy. Last Wednesday was terrible. I do remember that. It was hotter than all hell, but
this is what I call perfect baseball weather.
It is perfect baseball weather. Yes, sir.
It's not too hot to stand around in the outfield. It's not too cold to stand around in the outfield. So
the only position that stinks this time of year, playing baseball is catcher. You got all the gear on.
Yep.
You're crouched down. You got an ump breathing down your neck, and you got bats flying right in front of your face. And
sounds a lot like boot camp.
Yeah, and somehow you got to stop this flying object from getting by you.
Right. Right.
Here, we expect you to do all of these things in about 3 seconds. Go.
Right. Right. Yeah. Make an accurate throw to second base for that kid that's stealing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I spent some summers in some catcher's gear myself. So, yeah. But as we like to do, there's no guest today. We just shifted our schedule. We're recording in the afternoons now. My schedule at work switched. So, couldn't get a guest this week, but we have a bunch of guests lined up in the weeks coming. We look forward to speaking with those people. But as we always do, we like to check in, talk about some news. And, when we pull the news articles, Matt and I kind of throw some ideas back and forth about what articles we want to talk about. And this week, it was unanimous, hands down. There was one article that stood out amongst all of them. It's the most important news article that's out there this week. There's no other articles that come close. We had to speak about this one first.
It's frankly disappointing, if you ask me.
The
numbers that we're going to discuss are disappointing. We can do better as individuals, and we can do better as a society.
100%. As mankind, we need to rise up to these challenges, and I can't believe this number's this low. But there has been a new Guinness World Record set, and it is for the amount of high and low fives completed while skydiving. Now, I looked it up. The average height for a skydive is 10,000 feet. In this article, it does not say from where they took off at, so what their height was. But let's just say it was that 10,000 foot mark. A pair of British skydiving instructors have set a world record for 32 high and low fives completed while falling to the earth. I have never personally went skydiving. I have hung off the bottom of helicopters. I have fast roped, things of that nature, but I've never skydived. I've never jumped out of an airplane with a parachute strapped to my back and then released the parachute. But I could tell you right now, I could complete more than 32 high and low fives.
Right. It's a simple mathematical equation. If you have 10,000 feet that you're falling, from which you are falling, and you can execute X amount of high and low fives in that period of time, I do feel as though, you should be able to get, 10 per 1,000 feet or so. If you're falling at, what's terminal velocity for a human body?
70 some miles an hour or something like that?
Yeah. So you should be able to.
Yeah. And it takes a while to get to terminal velocity.
Yeah.
So, right. Listen, viewers, listeners of Beyond the Wire podcast, it is time we go out there, wear a GoPro. I want to see the video, but we need to break this record. Right. 32 is way too low of a number. As Matt said, it's disappointing, frankly.
Yep. These are important things that we have to address. Yep.
If extraterrestrial life came to this planet and they said, what's the record for high and low fives while, skydiving, and we came up with 32, they'd laugh in our faces.
Yep.
That's the best we can do. We're better than that.
100%.
So yeah, we need to work on those numbers. We need to get those numbers up.
Those are rookie numbers. We need to bump those numbers up.
Matt Askren has said he'll cheer us on as he watches. So,
well, he didn't know this, but he's coming with us.
Yeah.
So, Matt Askren, you are you're
gonna wear the GoPro and film us high fiving.
Yeah, you're part of this. That's the next time we're having you on the show is while we're doing this.
Yeah, we're not only gonna set high five records, we're also gonna podcast as we fall as well.
Right.
So,
Right. So that's so prepare, Matt Askren. We're doing this on let's call it mid-August. You got a couple weeks to really get.
voluntold is right.
He said, "I'm voluntold." That's absolutely right.
That's how it works.
That is in true Marine Corps and military fashion.
Yeah,
that's exactly what's happening here.
I need a couple volunteers. Oh, no one wants to put their hands up? Good. PFG Schmuckatelli and his buddy. Come on.
I always loved that, like from boot camp. Good to go. That's what they say. Oh, nobody wants to volunteer? Good to go. Yeah. You're like, here it goes.
Yeah.
That's where in boot camp, that's where becoming sort of like the guy who sits in the middle of the road, meaning you're not a standout, but you're not the guy who's always all messed up. You're kind of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I left boot camp. I had 4 drill instructors, senior drill instructor, 3 drill instructors. 2 of them didn't know my name by the end. So Perfect. I think I did a pretty good job of like just kind of staying there where like doing what I was supposed to do.
Just existing.
Right. And I did well. I wasn't the guy who was like, I want all the attention. And I also wasn't the guy who couldn't ever get his boots on in time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect place to be, because normally they're, when they're looking for a pair of volunteers and nobody wants to, and they're going to have to, select certain individuals. They are normally going to take one of the, hey, top guy, here's Mr. Dirtbag. Let's pair these 2 together, get this thing done.
Right.
So, yep. Our next article that we pulled up, and this is mildly concerning, kind of scary, if you will. Does the Pentagon need a better plan if the nuclear football goes missing? Pentagon IG aims to find out. So the nuclear football is the emergency satchel. It is known as the nuclear football. It's an integral part of launching a nuclear strike. And if this were to go missing, what's the Pentagon's plan? Here's what the plan should be. Don't flip and lose the nuclear football. Right. Like, by all costs.
Give it to the right person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really glad that they're having a conversation about this, about what the plan and the contingency looks like. But it's also concerning that they're having a conversation about this and what the plan and contingency looks like, because this is, if you're not familiar with what the nuclear football is, it's essentially a briefcase that has like the nuclear launch codes in it, and it follows the president. I don't know the chain of custody. I've seen it in the movies. I don't know the chain of custody for launching a nuclear strike, but at that moment, if you're launching a nuclear strike, we can all expect that the world has gone to heck. Hell in a handbasket, so to speak. Like something has gone horribly wrong. And that means that the president now has to authorize a nuclear strike. And they crack open this nuclear football, this briefcase. And the movies, it has like a little computer in it and stuff like that. I don't know if it actually has a computer with cell service in it, or if it's simply launch codes. If you know about the process for, and again, as if I know, I don't know, but I know the general idea here is that there are, the nuclear missiles that are in silos, and there are people that sit in those silos in those command centers, and they have to match the codes or the authorization from the president or whoever with the codes that they have in order to, turn the key and essentially launch a nuclear missile. I'm oversimplifying this, but
there are multiple briefcases that exist. So one follows the president,
right?
Wherever he goes, a member of the military, and they're obviously heavily guarded, has one of the briefcases. The vice president as well, and the designated survivor, someone in the line of succession of the president, is also in, a time of need, going to be put somewhere in a secure location, and they will also have access to one of these briefcases. I'm assuming there's at least one, maybe 2 more somewhere. Someone's got them, but we know for sure that there's at least 3 that float around and are, around important people at any given moment. So you can actually see there was footage of the Capitol riots. Pence and his team were going down a flight of stairs, and there's someone holding the briefcase.
Yep.
I think, Matt, before we started recording, you brought up the fact of, hey, maybe just don't lose it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing here is that they can't launch a nuclear missile from that briefcase alone. So it's like an integral necessary component of a larger system. But I think that the issue here is, and again, this is me not knowing much about this, just other than what I know about it through the grapevine. If that briefcase has matching codes for somebody who actually has to turn the key and push the button, if that football goes missing, but they don't have the codes to verify. So then it means that we can't launch nuclear missiles, which isn't necessarily a bad problem to have. If you think about it, like if we're launching nuclear missiles, that means somebody has launched against us, and it's in retaliation. I don't envision another scenario where we're going to use nuclear weapons.
Yeah, that at this point, I would say those are strictly for, well, if we're going to go, you're going to go too. So hopefully we and our extended families never have to see that day. That's for sure. So on to the next article. The article we pulled up is how Hollywood portrayed the war in Afghanistan. Now, obviously, both world wars, the Korean War, the Pacific, all of those, battles have been well documented through film, television series, things of that nature. The war in Afghanistan, despite the fact that it's been going on for 20 plus years now, there are so many fewer films and series dedicated to this conflict because the Pentagon's initial strategy was we're going to send in special forces, small units, the terrain, things of that nature. It kept members, of the news out of those areas. So the stories weren't getting back to the public like they have in so many other conflicts in the past. So now it is more of these stories are starting to trickle out from, the service members themselves. And this article states, we need more Afghan war stories to hear about the experiences of the men and women who serve there. Some great movies have been put on this list, but there's hope that in the years to come, more of these stories will make their way to the surface.
I have read in the past that Hollywood is dying for good stories. They're dying for good films to make, and so
how many reboots are there now? I mean,
right, and some of these movies are some of the reboots are, I don't know, some of the box office hits are, I don't know, not cheaply made. It's probably not the word to use, but I think the most popular movies are the ones that depict realistic situations. You think about, especially in combat and war movies, like Saving Private Ryan was arguably one of the most successful war movies ever made. And part of and it wasn't even a true story. It was maybe loosely based on true events, but it wasn't a true story at all. So it was essentially fiction, but the gritty realism of that movie is what made it so attractive to people. It was telling the story of the World War II veterans, the D-Day survivors, and what happened, and from that point forward, we have stories. You've seen Lone Survivor, you've seen Zero Dark 30. Like these are different movies that have been made based on post 9/11 events. Zero Dark 30, I think, was a decently made movie. I think all these movies are decently made, but I do think that in some cases they're a lot of Hollywood. It's a lot Hollywooded. I'd love to see more of those gritty, realistic, washed out videos like Saving Private Ryan. Like they actually turned down the saturation of the film to make it look like a gloomy day, but
they set a mood.
Yeah, they've still Hollywooded a lot of these. And, I would love to see a story about the Dakota Meyer incident where he was awarded his Medal of Honor in the Ganjgal Valley. That whole thing where he went in multiple times to retrieve his teammates that have been ambushed. I would love to see a movie about that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the big stories that I took away. As a Marine, he was the first living Marine recipient of the Medal of Honor since Vietnam or something along those lines. I might be misstating that, but there's an amazing story there where he went in 6 or 8 or 9 times back into this combat zone where he was well outnumbered and was pulling his friends out of this battle.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go over some of the films and series on this list. The first one they have listed here is The Outpost. The Outpost is the title describes exactly what it is. It was a remote outpost in Afghanistan, was constantly under fire on an almost daily basis. And it was essentially the Taliban was just kind of scouting things out, just trying to see what positions work the best. And then one day they decided they were going to attack the base. And this kind of is just that 24-hour block of how these soldiers survived. What's interesting about this film, for me at least, is it has what is the kid's name? Caleb Landry Jones plays a character in this film named Ty Carter. Ty in the movie is in the Army. You'll see if you ever watch this film that it does let you know that Ty was a former Marine. I actually served with Ty over in Camp Pendleton. I will say that Caleb Landry Jones does a good job. He looks a little bit like Ty, but Ty was much larger. He was a very well-built man, that's for sure. When I heard this story, I was blown away. It's no offense to Mr. Carter, but I have always looked at a Medal of Honor recipient as almost godlike. Knowing Ty before this incident, I would have never have guessed this individual would have done these things. But watching this film, it's crazy to say I've met, obviously before he won the Medal of Honor, but I know a Medal of Honor recipient. There were actually 2 Medal of Honor recipients from this incident that get portrayed in this movie. So
Clint Romachet and Ty Carter. And I think the interesting thing about this film was, or one among the, I think it was a well-documented, it's a realistic look at an actual event. So it's not based on a true story. It was a true story. It's not loosely based. Rather, it was depicted as though, how the events happened. It shows you the absolute terrifying situation that some of these people are put through. And this isn't a movie where you're watching it and you're watching Clint Romachet's character or Ty Carter's character, doing these heroic battle things. It's not in slow-mo, like he's going to run and go save somebody and machine gun fire and eruptions. And it's not like that. It actually shows the sheer terror, how scared these guys were. They're getting rained down upon. They're on this outpost that is actually in the draw or the valley of a mountain. In other words, one of the primary rules of combat is you always want to have the high ground. These guys did not have the high ground.
Yeah, they were set up in the low ground.
Yeah, I think that they even said that in the movie. Like, why did we set up an outpost? Like, whose idea was it to set up an outpost in the low ground? So you've got Taliban, maybe 50 or 100 or 1,000, who knows how many are in the hills, just dropping fire on them. And there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to run. And it shows the sheer terror of what happens in these situations. It's not these guys aren't running around like, I'm going to go out and be a hero today. It's not that at all. In fact, many of them will tell you, I didn't think that I was going to make it out alive. I knew I was going to die, and I was just doing what I had to do to help my guys or survive or whatever. So I think that movie, this movie, The Outpost, captures that.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of just trying to survive, the next film on the list does a pretty decent job of, really taking you through just trying to survive. It is Lone Survivor. It stars Mark Wahlberg. It is about Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell. He was part of a SEAL team that got sent out on a mission, Operation Red Wing, in 2005. He is the only survivor from this mission. All of his teammates did not make it home during this. I've seen this film. It's one of the movies on this list. I've probably watched this one 3-4 times, maybe. I see it on TV from now, every once in a while, and I'll, if I see it, I'll turn it on. But some of the other individuals that are starring this movie, Michael Murphy, who has the Memorial Day Murph workout, Danny Dietz, and Matt Axelson were some of the other individuals on his team that didn't make it. Essentially, it looks like things are all going the right way. They get spotted up in the hills. They had a decision to make. Do we take these individuals out that we don't know if they're friendly or enemy? It turns out they weren't necessarily enemy, but they went and told the enemy exactly who was up in the hills. And that started a big rundown of incidents and one thing after another.
there's been some controversy around that mission that they saw it on a social media conversation. Like, well, of course, Taliban and in Afghanistan, there's a large network of people with radios, and they're talking to each other. So even if you drop these guys off for an insert 10 miles away from the target, somebody still knows you're there. And so one of the comments made, I think it was Matt Axelson in the movie, his character, I forget what that gentleman's name was that played him in the movie, said something like, how did they find us so fast? Because they were up here in the hills, like on this cliffside, and all of a sudden there's like 50 dudes chasing them, shooting at them. And they're like, how did they find us so fast? We just got here. So it was, come to say that perhaps they already knew they were there. I think the other interesting thing about this is Marcus Luttrell is on a couple of different podcasts, namely, I think Joe Rogan's podcast, which, if you look at Beyond the Wire podcast and Joe Rogan's, we're
neck and neck.
We're right there in terms of viewership. But Marcus Luttrell talks about how the rescue was not as it was portrayed in the movie. The events were not as they were portrayed in the movie. It's based on the true story and the true telling, making sure the story is accurate enough to show the heroism of these Navy SEALs. But at the same time, you're trying to cram several hours of events, or maybe even several days of events, into a 2-hour movie. Mm-hmm. And so what they can get right is, this is what happened, but it's in this condensed version of 2 hours.
Yeah. Now, in that film, he ends up making it into a local town, and that's where they end up, retrieving Marcus from. Let's say in real life that didn't happen, and all he did is hide under some rocks, and they ended up finding him. For Hollywood purposes, that's not going to be a great ending to a movie. So they might have wrote something like that in, but in this case, that wasn't the deal. So the next one on this list, and I'll admit I have not seen this one, War Machine. It stars Brad Pitt. This is more of a satire on the on the war, on the conflict. Brad Pitt plays General Stanley McChrystal. Apparently, he has some self-destructive conversations with journalists. It seemed to get a following from people that served in the conflict as well as detractors. So,
I've seen this one. I think he is. So his character's name is General Glenn McMahon, except I think it is supposed to be Stanley McChrystal, or it's supposed to be something along those lines. But I also went into this movie thinking, oh, this is going to be a good, inside behind the lines, sort of like what's happening on the officer side of things when they're trying to plan out situations where there's not a whole lot of intel. And that's a lot of what this movie was, but it was kind of silly. And if I'm being honest, they made his character, Brad Pitt's character, seems like, I don't know how to explain this, kind of an idiot. And I don't like that, because I know that the generals in real life, in the military, the generals in the army, brilliant. General McChrystal, these are some of the smartest human beings on earth.
Yeah.
They're not bumbling fools. And so, the reason why this is the movie is satire. Not that this guy was a bumbling fool in the movie, but his character was a little off.
Yeah.
And it's not a realistic depiction of, so again, your army generals, your military generals, and your high level military officers are some of the most brilliant people in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You're not going to get that rank in that structured of an environment without being brilliant.
They've done things. These people have just
any track record of success, one after the next.
Look up their backgrounds, and you'll see how many degrees they have, where they've gone to school, what experiences they've had. They've been all around the world. And not that any of those things by themselves make somebody a brilliant person, but when you reach the rank of general, when you're leading large elements like that in the military, it's because you've been vetted by so many people along the way. Politicians, civilians, military troops, everybody along the way has said, yes, this person's a capable leader. Mm-hmm. You don't just end up there because you stayed in for a long time.
Yeah. If there are members of the military that truly could transition directly into C-suites, those are the guys.
That's it.
The next movie on the list is 12 Strong. It has Chris Hemsworth, better known as Thor, in the movie. I do remember watching this movie. I don't remember much about it, though. I do know that it was, I want to say it was Green Berets. They go in, they're tasked with taking over a town. They're fighting alongside Afghani rebels.
Yep.
And yeah, at some point they're on horseback riding through Afghanistan.
Well, they are the horse soldiers that they were the first U.S. troops to go into Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks. And so, again, it's taking several weeks, if not months, of operations and cramming it into a 2-hour movie. And so that's why I say for anybody watching these movies, if you're unfamiliar with military operations, these dudes are not running blazing through gunfire on their on horseback. And in this case, in real life, maybe they did that once or twice. But in this movie, there are a handful of battles that are condensed into 10-minute segments, battles that would have taken hours or days, But the depiction here is that these were the special operations troops that landed in Afghanistan to develop a combat relationship with the Northern Alliance to go fight the Taliban. They were trying to figure out who took down the World Trade Center, and they wanted to go bring that fight to them. And they started marking targets and figuring out who the bad guys were, who the good guys were. And if you recall, I remember this very distinctly. I was at Camp Pendleton when we started carpet bombing the mountains of Afghanistan. I guess it was October of 2001. I remember a friend of mine from back home called me and she said, "Hey, turn on the news. The war has started in Afghanistan." I remember thinking to myself, like, well, I didn't hear anything about this. I'm in the military. Turned on the TV and there they were bombing tactical targets, and there was video footage of it. And these guys were apparently the ones that went in and essentially marked the targets and said, "Here's where the bad guys are. Here's where we start." Interestingly enough, there's also a horse soldier statue in New York City that is also, I believe it's near the 9/11 memorial. But it is this large statue that has one of these Green Beret soldiers on horseback. And so it's a cool memorial to. Say again?
You know if that's relatively new?
I think it is relatively new.
Okay, I was there 4 years ago. I don't remember seeing it, but
let me see.
Gives me a reason to go back.
Yeah, so. I just found out about this not too long ago, and it's largely because we're going to be there. I'm going to be there pretty soon. So
nice.
It's in Liberty Park, World Trade Center. It's in the New York. It's the America's Response Monument.
Okay.
Unofficially known as the Horse Soldier Statue. It says that it was. Well, I'll keep looking at it. Let's keep talking. And I'll try to figure out when they actually put it up.
Yeah, they were still definitely under construction the last time I was there. So the next one on the list is the 2016 film Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. This is more of a comedy for sure. It stars Tina Fey. It goes over real life journalist Kim Barker's memoir, The Taliban Shuffle. It essentially is the frustrations of journalists trying to cover the war. Because as we spoke earlier, a lot of these battles for this conflict were in areas and terrain that journalists weren't going to be able to safely go into and through. Most journalists probably weren't in the sort of shape they needed to be in order to keep up with military units going through these areas as well as a lot of it was done with special forces, which hey, you can maybe follow around a unit of combat engineers or infantrymen or whatever, but you're not going to follow a SEAL team. You're not going to follow a team of Green Berets around. It's just not going to happen. Right. The Pentagon's not going to allow that to happen. So I'm sure a lot of the journalists who entire job, they want to be out there. They want to see what's actually happening and be able to report it. And they're kind of having to sit back in these compounds in these cities, and a spokesperson for the DoD will come in and say, hey, we had a team go out and this is what they did. It could be 100% true. It could be 100% false. And they don't know. That's what they are given to report, though.
Yep. So, I watched this movie a few years ago, probably right after it came out. And I do recall it being a really good movie, although, unfortunately, and this isn't to say anything about the movie. It's memorable. I just don't remember the storyline at this point. I have seen it. I do recall, this is one that I would go back and pick up again. It's not so much about war as much as it is, again, about journalists covering war. So it's the nonsense that happens, as I recall, it's the nonsense that happens with them trying to get access to things. And if I'm thinking correctly, it's also around how journalists compete for stories while they're in theater. Like how one journalist is like, no, I want that action. And they're not given that type of stuff.
The next one on the list, and this is, I remember this story. I've never seen this film. And honestly, this story is, it's not a great story. It's a terrible tragedy what happened, but this story goes around and hits on the 2010 incident in the Mayward district in which Army troops murdered Afghan civilians and collected their body parts as trophies. It says that this is a bleak movie based on an even bleaker documentary about devastating war crimes. A young Army soldier can't reconcile what his unit is doing. A sergeant apparently was in charge of a smaller unit, not really overlooked too much, kind of out there on an outpost. And this sergeant is essentially just wants to kill anyone who does not look like an American, and they're collecting body parts as trophies. I remember the story from years back, and it's not a story that we want to highlight necessarily. That's for sure.
Right. Well, this is, again, like any other incident that happens that you see spotlighted in the media, 99.99% of the time, this kind of stuff is not happening. Most troops are not this. Most troops that I ever served with and operations that I was in were morally sound people. They were decent human beings put into a strange situation. Now, do ugly things happen in combat and in war? Absolutely. But still no excuse for that type of thing. And I say this because as I have been in this realm of work, the post-military careerism realm of work for my entire career, I talk to people a lot about these types of things, and I tell them this type of incident is isolated and so rare, but of course we're going to make a movie about it. The other thing here is Alexander Skarsgård was also in Generation Kill. If you've ever seen that HBO series, it's like a 10-part HBO series about a Marine recon unit in the early days of the Iraq invasion. He's a good actor. I like that guy as an actor, and he played a great role in that as like a squad leader or a platoon sergeant in Generation Kill. So it's interesting. He's in a bunch of movies where he's in the military, to include Battleship and this one and probably a few others.
The next one on the list, 2009, the movie Brothers. It stars Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal, who are the brothers, and Natalie Portman plays the wife of Tobey Maguire, who plays the role of Captain Sam Cowhill, who was captured by the Taliban. Upon his release, he's trying to integrate back into the civilian world back in his hometown, dealing with PTSD. Again, this came out in 2009. I do know I've seen this. Terrible memory. Can't even really tell you what goes on through the film. But I remember watching it. It was a decent film.
I don't think I've ever seen this one.
Okay. The last one on the list came out in 2007. It is titled Lions for Lambs. Can't say I've seen this one. But this movie stars Robert Redford, Tom Cruise, and Meryl Streep. Redford plays a college professor who tries to get through his apathetic student with a story about two previous students who enlisted to fight in Afghanistan after graduation. They serve bravely and don't deserve their fate. I don't know anything about this movie, honestly, but now that it's on this list, I think I'm probably going to check that one out.
I haven't seen this one either.
So, but yeah, this list is up there on military.com. I'm trying to think. Was it Jarhead? Was the movie about the snipers? Yeah,
in Desert Storm, in the first
in Desert Storm. I will say that if there's a movie that captures like that hurry up and wait aspect of the military, and if you give at least, I can speak for Marines because we were Marines. If you give a group of Marines nothing to do and a bunch of time on their hands, the shenanigans that take place in that movie actually goes on. That is the one film, the piece of film that I've seen that makes me go, yep, that happens.
Well, and that's, I have heard from so many other fellow veterans and fellow Marines that they're like, that movie was boring. It wasn't, what it was sold as or whatever.
Because the individuals were bored.
Well, that's the thing. it's not really it's not a war movie as much as it is a movie set during wartime in a war theater. And it's not, we're so used to these war movies being
action, battle, boom,
gunfights, jump out of an airplane, explosions, and there's none of that in this movie. Every time they show up to something where they think they're going to be able to operate, somebody's already been there.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most action they got in that film was when they were like patrolling through the desert and like an A-10 or an aircraft of some sort strafed them by accident.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Well, towards the end of the movie, they're in a tower overlooking an airfield, and they end up just, coming through, lighting the place up with some bombs, all
dropping
fighters.
Bombs.
And was it Gyllenhaal in that movie?
Yeah.
He loses his, he's like, he's sitting in the corner freaking out.
Or it was the other guy. And the other guy ends up, I think at the end of that movie, the other guy ends up, he's dead. Like they're back in the civilian world and he died for some reason, but he was having a really hard time.
Because all they want to do is just do anything.
Well, and every
time.
Yeah. And that's been the, not to off the topic a little bit, but that's always been the thing about you're training combat troops to go to combat. You're training them and training them. You're training them to, like I always say this about the Marine Corps. It's a very violent and aggressive culture. That's the nature of that entity. That's one of the reasons why we signed up for it, was not for the violence per se, but the aggressive culture, the nature of the Marine Corps being the hardest branch of the military. You take any other operational status there, like any combat troops, they are trained to be hammers. And the saying, like hammers to a hammer, everything's a nail, So you're taking these people and then throwing them into these situations where people are throwing rocks at them, or people might be shooting at them in the mountains or what have you. And then in some cases, they either want to get into the fight, they're itching to get into the fight, or B, once they're in the fight, maybe they do something wrong. And I am not nearly justifying any bad behavior, but there have been things that happened, to the end of time, since the beginning of human beings and war and conflict. There have been things that happened that were questionable during combat. And that's what happens. You get these people to this point where it's like, hey, go kick doors down and fight. And then when they start kicking doors down and fighting everybody, it's, hey, wait a minute.
There's a lot of collateral damage because everything's getting flattened.
Right. But then taking a step further, how do you come home from that?
Yeah.
And that's a conversation it's forever going.
I know I've been given rules of engagement a handful of times. Every time I've read through rules of engagement, I go, this is ridiculous, because until they say we're going, just go, they're trying to handcuff you as much as possible to keep bad things from happening, to keep, these young men and women who are honestly itching to go and get something going, to keep them from making bad decisions and putting them in a bad place.
Yep.
So you have these combat units that are given these pretty restrictive rules of engagement. And once a commanding officer somewhere says, okay, we've been given the order, go ahead and not necessarily rip them up, but put that in your back pocket. It's time to go do work. Yeah, things will get a little messier than, probably, politicians would like.
Right.
But
and a lot of these engagements are not happening. Like it's we're no longer storming beaches where the bad guys are 20 meters in front of you in a machine gun nest, and you have to go after them. Now it's, anybody can go pick up YouTube and watch videos like combat helmet cam videos and stuff like that. I mean, 99% of the time, you don't even see who's shooting at you. You're in a field in Iraq or Afghanistan. You're in the mountains of Afghanistan, and you hear rounds impacting, but they don't even know who they're shooting at. So the overkill becomes, all right, let's just drop mortars and bombs on the hillside, and then the conversation becomes, well, you killed this guy's whole flock of sheep.
The sheep farmer was up there.
Right. Or you killed all the sheep, and now we owe him money. It's like, well, but there were also 15 guys up there shooting at us.
Yeah.
So it's like letting the dogs loose. Yeah.
If you let the pack of dogs loose, the wrong person might get bit.
Right.
Our last article we have pulled up, and this one slides in real well with our podcast and what we talk about. The title, though, will kind of catch you off guard. Are you networking like a dirtbag? fun little headline there. Networking sounds dirty, doesn't it? When you're in a military transition, the idea of calling up good old Bob or friend Judy from 3 duty stations ago for an informational interview sounds awful. It sounds like begging. It sounds like you're imposing. It sounds like the only thing that losers and dirtbags would do. It might seem that way, but really, that's not the case. We need to make and normalize networking. 85% of candidates get their jobs through networking. Right. Matt, you hammer this point home all the time. Network. Those are your 3 pillars, essentially, for transitioning veterans. Yep. Get out there and network. Get out there and talk to people that you've served with, to people that you've served with that they know, and just continue to go on spreading that network out.
Right.
Matt, you do an amazing job of helping veterans get in where they fit in, let's say, with your company. If their cousin's now getting out of the military, they might say, hey, listen, I spoke with this guy, Matt Disher. He did a fantastic job of working with me. Give him a call. Hit him up here. Find him on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Don't think that you're imposing. Don't think that you're, making somebody do something they don't want to do. You're asking for help.
Well, and this is, you're exactly right. And I hear this from a lot of people. They're afraid to ask for favors. And I'll caveat that with saying that sometimes people don't respond. And I'm guilty of this. I'm bombarded by requests, internal company, external candidates, nonprofits, you name it, just conversations in general, because for a number of different reasons, there are 200,000 people, 250,000 people that leave the military every year. Talent acquisition right now, and for the recent couple of years behind us and into the foreseeable future, talent acquisition is a big hot topic lately, and will be, because this is the turnover tsunami year. Everybody's changing jobs, so every company is dying for talent. And what happens is, people start to realize, and rightfully so, they start to realize that the military is a great place. Again, 200 to 250,000 people leaving every year. And these are well-skilled, educated people. I want access to them. Just the same, the candidate is trying to plug into that too. We were combat engineers. I blew things up and shot guns. Essentially, that was my job description in the military. But what do I do when I get out? And who do I go talk to? And sometimes the best process there is networking and asking people questions. You're not asking for jobs. Again, I always say this: don't go banging on people's doors and asking for jobs, because that handcuffs me. I don't know exactly what I can plug you into right at this moment. Although that's part of my job, is exactly that. The problem is I simply don't have a million jobs sitting on the desk that I could just plug into that might require somebody who has no industry experience. But what you'll find is, and this is what I do quite a bit, I mentor people who are E4s. I mentor people who are O6s. I have mentored people from the entry level junior ranks to the executive level officer ranks. And 99% of the time, the way I try to guide that conversation is connect with as many people as you can and ask questions about what they do in their industry and how they got where they're going. And what you get out of that is not that one of those people is going to offer you a job. What you get out of that is understanding what jobs there are, what opportunities there are. You might be like, hey, you know what? I decided I was going to go work on an assembly line building cars, but instead I think I'm an author and I'm going to write a book. And it sounds like 2 totally opposite places, but that's what happens to a lot of these people. They're in the military and they think that they have to pursue a job that's just like what they did in the military. And then they get hung up on this idea that, like, I did HR in the military, I'm going to do HR out here. Well, HR in the military doesn't always look like HR in a company. You might find that you're a people person. That's why you like HR. You want to deal with people. You want to go out and shake hands and kiss babies and things like that. What if you're a salesperson instead? But you'd never know that, because what you've heard from sales about sales on the internet is they want you to sell widgets and they want you to cold call people. I don't want to do that. Well, that's not all sales. Sales is not always cold calling people. It's not always selling widgets that nobody wants. If you didn't have salespeople, nobody would buy cars, nobody would buy houses, buildings would never get sold. Nothing would get sold. So there are these amazing career opportunities out there. You just have to start talking to people. I think the other part of that article, Tim, is it says something along the lines of once you plug into your job, start being that conduit for networking.
Well, before we get to that, it says, how do you know if you're properly networking in a post-COVID environment? And it says that there's an easy trick that you are probably already doing and you don't even realize it. But when you're having conversations, and you kind of brought this up, is just ask. You're not asking for a job, but you're asking about what they're doing, where they're at, how they get there. So one, where are they? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, where they were, where they are, and where they'd like to go next. So,
right.
Matt was in Okinawa. He is now back in Cincinnati. And, maybe when his son graduates and is off to college, he and his wife would like to, move down to Florida.
Right.
That gives you an idea of who they were in the military, who they are now. And then you can have that conversation about, okay, so how'd you get from A to B? Right. And then what their plan is for 10, 15 years in the future. Okay, so here's what you'd like to do. How do you plan on getting there? And that will give you some ideas, some best practices potentially. During those, hey, so how'd you get from point A to point B? They'll say, man, those first couple of interviews, I was rigid. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I was throwing knife hands in the interview, mm-hmm. Things of that nature. Hey, I can take a, 240 golf apart in 30 seconds. That's awesome.
Right.
But we sell stuff here.
Right.
Unless you're going to hold people at gunpoint and make them buy it.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it says here that after you get your own civilian job, it is a best practice to resolve to be one of those veterans who take these calls from transitioning soldiers, sailors, coasties, and Marines, as well as airmen. Don't forget the airmen, mm-hmm. Who come behind you, because the world of work doesn't turn without good old Bob and friend Judy, who are working this magic for all of us. So Matt, you have found a job essentially doing this. You've
that's my entire career focus. Now, mm-hmm. And I'll oversimplify this. That's part of my career focus. A lot of it is it's I'm a marketer, I'm a recruiter, I am a speaker. I wear so many different hats during the day, but a big part of that is to try to attract the right people to kind of jump into the bucket to have a conversation about this. Mm-hmm. And as one person, I'm only able to influence as much as I can there. But there are resources like Veterati and American Corporate Partners where people can go out and find additional mentors and have these conversations and ask these questions. And those are just resources that are infinitely better than anything we ever had when we were coming out of the military. There was no such thing. As far as I knew, the best I could do when I came out of the Marine Corps was go to a recruit military event. Mm-hmm. And that was a job fair. I wasn't getting mentorship there. I was talking to employers about post-military jobs, and a lot of those were entry-level jobs that were, come in and learn how to sell insurance or come work on school buses. And those are, I have nothing against those jobs. It's not anything that I was interested in. So now you've got all these resources, Veterati, American Corporate Partners, LinkedIn, knocking on people's doors. You can take all of the stuff that you've learned, post-military, and you can now use that. And I'll say this along those lines. You don't have to be a trained mentor to mentor somebody. This is a common misconception. I don't know anything about mentoring anybody. I mean, whenever I talk to somebody, I'm thinking in the back of my head, I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't know if I'm giving them the best advice. And it's not because I really think that I'm not giving them anything. It's just because there is no such thing as formal training. All you're doing is explaining to them. Like I always ask people, what do you think you want to do? And when they say, well, I want to go do HR, I give them my knowledge of what HR looks like inside of a company. I've worked in 5 companies post-military. Mm-hmm. HR department looked different every single time. Here's what they looked like. If you enjoy interacting with customers or clients or internal customers and you enjoy workplace culture, then you need to look for a company that has X. If you want to do the HR side of payroll and benefits, that's different, mm-hmm. Totally different. Absolutely. But mentorship is really explaining to people how you got where you're going and how that applies to them. and using those lessons you learned. So I say that to anybody who's like scratching their head, like, well, I don't know how to be a mentor. You already are a mentor. If you've experienced some lumps and some challenges and you've overcome some hurdles, you're already a mentor. You just need to start sharing that information. And don't assume that, and I've done this, don't assume that the information you're sharing is silly or useless, because it's not. Let the person on the other end of the line determine if it's silly or useless. They'll tell you, hey, that's, I already knew that. Thanks. 99% of the time I can be like, hey, listen, kittens like to be pet. And they're like, I didn't know that, like it's, really? I'm like, I thought everybody knew that,
So I should stop punching them.
Right. But it really is like, it's again, it's that piece of advice that I always give. Don't go asking for jobs. Go ask people if you can have a conversation about their post-military career. What it will lead to is introductions and additional networking, which will lead to job conversations. But if you just jump right in and say, hey, Bob, I need a job. So you got out of the Marine Corps 20 years ago. I'm a Marine too. Hey man, I don't have time for this. Like I'm not your hotel concierge. I can't figure out how you rent a jet ski today.
Yeah.
And that's part of my job inside of my company is to find those matches. But most people are not in that position. They don't have time to do that, or they don't have visibility to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe not Matt, you say that someone comes to you, hey, this is what I'd like to do. This is where I'd like to be. Matt, if he has something available, would love to try to plug you in there, but that's not always going to work out. But Matt also has hundreds of contacts that do roughly the same thing he does in very differing fields, in different locations. And he might say, well, I don't have anything for you there, but hey, you want to go to Dallas? I have a guy who does XYZ down in Dallas for this company.
Right.
Here's how you get in contact with this individual. And then you have a conversation, you ask some questions.
Yeah. And that's the other piece about being in the recruiting world, whether or not you're in the recruiting world. But in a lot of cases, if you're talking to a person about a company or an industry, or if you're even talking to a recruiter about a job, that person, chances are, again, 99% of the time, chances are that person is not the one to make a hiring decision, or they are not the one solely making the decision. So in other words, a hiring process in a company is not one guy like, well, I really want to hire Tim Keller. In some cases it could be. If if you bumped into the CEO of a company and you're having lunch with him and he's like, you know what, I really want to hire you, chances are that'll probably happen because he'll instruct people to make it happen. But if you've reached out to the middle manager in a company or the recruiter or the HR manager at a company, you're like, hey, I'd really like this job. Chances are their hiring process involves 6 other people. There's going to be some interviews there. I know I worked for a company where we typically, for different levels of hiring, different levels of hierarchy, when we hired somebody, we had to have X amount of people from different levels of hierarchy in the company interview them. And then we all had to get together for like a powwow at the end of the interview cycle and say, okay, what did we like? What did we dislike? And if one person was the dissenter, we would either try to change their mind or we would not hire that person. We move on to somebody else. So it's like the Supreme Court. It had to be like it was like a jury almost.
Yeah.
It had to be a unanimous decision. Not the Supreme Court. Jury had to be a unanimous decision to make sure that person was hired. So again, it's just food for, it's kind of like the behind the scenes stuff here. It's not as easy as just calling Bob on LinkedIn and be like, hey, Bob, I see you have a job. I want this job. Bob might know somebody. It's a matter of, it's like a lattice. There's a lot of different ways that you need to kind of plug in and get to the right people, which ultimately will lead you to where you need to go. I think very quickly, the other piece of advice I'd give anybody is get your foot in the door. Just get your foot in the door. You don't have to be the CEO tomorrow. The job that you want right now is the job that's going to teach you how that industry works, especially if you're right out of the military. You do not have to be making all the money right now. So get your foot in the door. That's the hardest part of getting hired at a good company, especially if it's a noticeably good company. Everybody wants to work there. They have their pick of the litter of people. So find an opportunity that pays the bills if it's within reason. Plug into that company, then figure out how you're going to conquer the world, But I talk to a lot of people that are like an E6 coming out of the military after 10 years, and they're like, well, I really want to do graphic design. I'm like, I have a marketing coordinator job. It'll be a good inlet to get to graphic design, but you don't have a whole lot of experience in graphic design. And I've heard people say, thanks, but I'm really trying to get into graphic design. I'm like, you don't have any experience.
Yeah.
You're not just going to end up there. Get your foot in the door, work with the team, work with the leaders, learn, then go back and prove that you're the best candidate out there. You're the obvious choice, as I say. Then 2 years you'll be the graphic designer. But it's just 2 years down the road. Doesn't have to happen right at this moment.
Well, if you're a staff sergeant, if you're an E6, it's a third, maybe even less, an eighth of your military career at that point.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's an interesting article. At the end of the article, it does say, find out the secrets to getting civilian hiring manager to see your true value. They do have a transition masterclass being held July 29th. So again, this article is titled, Are You Networking Like a Dirtbag? If you're interested in the masterclass, there's a link to sign up there. So great information. Good fun stuff though.
Oh yeah.
Now we got a couple more minutes. The only other thing, I kind of jotted down in my notes is, did you see that Bezos went to space, or just like the very edge of space?
I was watching a minute ago. I was eating a granola bar before we went live, and I was watching I was fast forwarding through the 9-hour video that they posted on Facebook or whatever it was, or 6-hour video. So I did see that. It was interesting.
That shuttle was shaped like, what
Austin
everybody thinks it was shaped. Yeah.
It was like an Austin Powers movie.
Yeah.
Johnson.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the shuttle, just, type in Bezos space launch, check it out.
I have to think about all this because just a couple of weeks ago we had Richard Branson go into space in what looks like an airplane. And it was basically an oddly shaped airplane spaceship looking shuttle thing. And so then Bezos and team goes up in the other, it's more like a rocket.
Blue Horizon or whatever?
Yeah. Blue Origin?
Blue Origin, there you go.
They went up in a completely different type of vehicle. But I just think it's interesting how these two different types of vehicles, they're doing the same thing, but they went up differently.
It was, I will say that Bezos was much more to what we've seen in the past from a NASA space shuttle. It's different though at the same time.
Right.
Where a NASA space shuttle, that front end kind of looks like a 747, a big jet.
Right. And the rocket that Bezos went up on, it actually came back down. So we've seen SpaceX. The SpaceX has a lot of it's a direct competitor of SpaceX, as I'm aware. But the rocket itself came back down. I was actually watching a thing with Elon Musk the other day, and he was talking about the cost of sending rockets into space. The majority of the cost was always on the build, and that's where the idea around sending up reusable rockets came from. That NASA needed a bigger budget to do all the space exploration because they were throwing away the rockets every time, or they were just dropping them off at space. And he said the materials, fuel and stuff, were relatively cheap. Unless I misunderstood him, but it was kind of
comparatively to the actual rocket that houses the fuel.
If we can just recycle the whole thing and just refill it with fuel, with solid rocket fuel or liquid rocket, however they do that, then you're actually saving a lot of money. And that's where the civilian rocket space race came from, which we've, only relatively seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And, it's these billionaires that are doing it, but hey, good on them.
I'll tell you, when I become a billionaire, which I plan to do in the next couple of years,
weeks,
I can't divulge my plans on my billionaire status. But when I become a billionaire, I'll probably also start a space company.
There you go.
And I'll go to space too. And you'll see me on Facebook, on the news, going to space. So, and I'll invite you, Tim.
There you go. We'll claim the moon. It'll be ours.
We'll do a podcast.
Yeah.
From I think it's the Kármán line or something. I think that's where they say that's where where space ends or space begins and the Earth ends or something like that. So you're officially in space when you pass that line. We'll do a podcast as we cross that line. It's going to be similar to when I was like 20 years old and I crossed the international date line and the equator at the same time.
You became a greenback.
A greenback or shellback.
Shellback. Sorry,
shellback. Yeah.
Now, real quick, did you have to do any of the weird, things that go along? Okay.
They didn't allow us to participate. So the Navy of the ship was doing it. The Marines were not allowed. Like we had to go sit down and we weren't allowed to participate in it. So, which is fine with me because frankly, I didn't want to participate.
If you don't know what we're talking about, just you can find some like shellback, air quotes here, hazing.
Yeah.
It's fun little events that happen for people that pass the equator for the first time. I'm assuming that if the Space Force is anything like the Marine Corps, there will be that, hey, it's your first time in space.
Yeah.
You get to go outside in your spacesuit and do a spacewalk or something. I don't know.
That's right.
But,
and they're out there floating around in space, like beating each other up and spraying them with fire hoses and stuff.
Yeah. You got to cover your mask in shaving cream and find your way back into the capsule.
Right. That sounds terrible.
A space version of Marco Polo. It'll be until we lose a Space Force member, then that'll be put to a screeching halt. But
how could this have been avoided? And they're like, we
don't know. Not cover his space mask with shaving cream.
Right. No, we didn't do shaving cream. No, we weren't hazing him.
Yeah. So anyways, this has been a fun episode. Like I said, we have some guests lined up for the next coming weeks. We look forward to having those talks with those amazing individuals. But until then, you can find us on all major podcast platforms as well as social media platforms. Check us out. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a review. Let us know how we're doing. It also helps us in the algorithms of iTunes and Facebook and all the other places. Jump up there and more eyes and ears can be put onto this podcast. We appreciate everybody that checks us out, though. And we'll see you right back here next week